The first overall selection in the 2023 NHL Draft belongs to the Chicago Blackhawks.
Bedlam in Chicago. Chicagoland fans high-fiving on their feet, going nuts.
Guys, the Chicago Blackhawks have won the 2023 NHL Draft Lottery. I mean, I went around and I kind of looked about at what fan bases were thinking before this, and most of them really hated the idea of the Blackhawks winning. They've been good for so long, and they win again. But
why did they hate the idea of the Blackhawks winning?
I mean, they've had superstars. They've won 3 cups in probably the last 15 years-ish, and people don't want to see that anymore. People want to see their own teams win. So, obviously, you can see the draft picks here. Chicago's really the one team that moves up there. Anaheim, terrible luck for them in terms of, we were talking about it in the studio here, the last time when they lost out on Sidney Crosby. They're probably having flashbacks now. So, what do you think for Anaheim fans? Are they kind of, should they be devastated right now?
No. Listen, there's one generational player in the draft, and there's a lot of really good players after Connor Bedard. But let's just think back to Chicago here for a second. Chicago goes into Pittsburgh and knocks them out of the playoffs.
Yeah.
Right? And you think they're hurting themselves with the draft lottery, right? But think about this line of thinking. They knock Pittsburgh out of the playoffs, which allows Florida into the playoffs. They win the lottery, and Florida is on the cusp of knocking the Leafs out of the playoffs.
That up, Craig.
Well, just think about Chicago. Like, everybody goes, why are you trying to win? Why are you trying to win? And then they finish with the third best odds to win the lottery, and here they are. They created a lot of disappointment for some teams, Calgary included, and some excitement for the Florida Panthers.
And Columbus did some winning at the end. They beat Pittsburgh as well. They won a game late in the season in overtime, and Columbus fans are kind of used to this. Like, they've dropped out of the lottery a number of times over the years, so it's not surprising to see that they dropped to 3. But like you said, they're still going to get a good player. They're just not going to get Connor Bedard. They're not going to get that generational talent that turns your team around in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, and you go back, I mean, we're talking about Sidney Crosby in 2005, and Bobby Ryan ends up being the second overall pick. And Bobby Ryan had a solid NHL career. I think Adam Fantilli projects as a real top-notch player in the NHL. So the Anaheim Ducks can be disappointed about not winning the lottery. Well, I can only say this, that it's not really a consolation prize. This is a really good player.
Okay, well, with that, let's start doing this actual mock draft here. Craig Button has actually done a mock draft for each of your teams and who they might pick for this. So obviously, we're going to be reading some of the comments as well. I've got my laptop here, so
take it easy on us too.
Yeah.
Take it easy on Craig.
I disagree. Let us know. Let us have it. Craig can handle it. He's a big boy.
Yeah.
And I think with that, Craig, I'm dying to know.
The suspense is killing us, Craig.
Who's going first overall?
It's been the Connor Bedard sweepstakes for years now. Like, let's face it. And, there's no surprise here that when you look at Connor Bedard and the brilliance that he's had in his career, I don't throw this out casually. He had the best junior career since Wayne Gretzky in 1977-78. And people go, whoa, 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 Mr. Button. What about McDavid? What about Crosby? What about Lemieux? Well, what about them? Hey, they all dominated their leagues, just like Connor Bedard did. But the difference is that Connor Bedard dominated the World Junior. McDavid, Crosby, and Lemieux did not do that. The last guy at that age to do it was Wayne Gretzky. And that's why I say you have Connor Bedard. And now you're going to build. It's going to take a little bit of time for the Blackhawks to come back to the level that they were at with Kane and Taves. But at the end of the day, you want to start. And like every other team that drafted a top player, whether it be Lemieux or whether it be Lindros or whether it be Crosby or whether it be McDavid, you move yourself into a category and saying, we will be a Stanley Cup contender at some point in time. And that might not happen soon here for Connor Bedard, just like it didn't happen for Lemieux or Connor McDavid yet, and certainly Lindros never was able to win the cup. But you now are in a Stanley Cup contender category because of that player.
Well, and it's not just Bedard. It's what he does to your franchise because, yeah, Chicago's a great city. We've been there. It's a great hockey town. But now it becomes a place that players really want to sign. Similar to Edmonton, I want to play with McDavid. Toronto, I want to play with Austin Matthews. Guess what? It's going to be a lot of good players that want to play with Connor Bedard, and that is going to attract good free agents, and that is the next step for them. They are going to need to sign free agents that can help build this team, players who are not just 1 or 2 year pieces of patchwork like they've done recently. recently. And it'll be really important for Connor Bedard to have an influence as far as a veteran player who can help guide him along. Similar to how Sidney Crosby had with Mario Lemieux. He lived in the same house. Ryan O'Reilly had that with Darcy Tucker. Like, it's so important for an 18-year-old, regardless of how good that player is, to have someone to lean on the bus, in the meals, on the plane. Like, to have that influence will be really important for Connor Bedard. And it'll be interesting to see who that is for the Chicago Blackhawks, because Jonathan Toews, he's not going to be there anymore. But you still have players like, Connor Murphy is a name. He's been around a long time. By all accounts, he's a good guy. Like, he's going to need that influence as a young player.
What about Patrick Kane?
I mean,
they didn't close the door on Patrick Kane. They closed the door on Jonathan Toews.
Patrick Kane seemed to kind of close the door on Chicago, but maybe this changes things a little bit. But also, here, Spike11 in the chat is saying that Bedard is a combination of Kane and Toews himself. So maybe they don't need him anymore. But I think, obviously we'll continue talking about Bedard probably throughout the show. But let's move on to our second pick. Maybe, give some hope to some of these other teams that are realistically the losers of this night. But, I mean, Craig says you're not, okay? So he's about to kind of console you a bit. And who do you got going second overall to the Anaheim
Adam
Ducks?
Fantilli, from the University of Michigan. And Adam Fantilli is a hard-driving. He has a style of game like Nathan MacKinnon. Now, when I say style, keep that in mind, style of game. He plays at a frenzied pace. He plays at a high tempo, and he's hungry to score. When you think about Nathan MacKinnon and you think about the way Nathan MacKinnon plays the game, it's in direct, straight, fast lines, always to the net, always wanting to make a difference. That's how Adam Fantilli plays. And I mean, he wins the Hobey Baker Award as best college player. Only the third freshman to ever do that, and he was a dominant player for the Wolverines.
And they're going to be building something pretty nice out in Anaheim, aren't they? Like Mason McTavish, we know the kind of game he has. We saw him at the World Juniors. And Trevor Zegras, he's showtime. Like, we know about the hands, we know about the big plays. But this Adam Fantilli, he's a guy who's going to drive both of those guys into the fight every single night. And he's young. He's going to be coming into the league. It's going to take time. But that's the kind of game he has, Craig. And you talked about it, the speed, the pace he plays with. Like, if you want to play with this guy, you better keep up. And it's not just going to be about doing Michigans and all the fancy stuff. Like, he is going to drive play, and he's going to drive really skilled players up front on that Anaheim team into the fight every single night.
Yeah, played with Olin Zellweger with the World Junior, the winning gold medal team. So there's some familiarity with some of the players that are already there.
And they're building a nice thing on the back. You talk about Zellweger, Tyson Hines, like they have some nice up-and-coming young players. And we always talk about it where these teams that are rebuilding and regrouping, you want the timelines to match up. You don't want a D-core that's aging with a young forward group. Like, you want those timelines to match up. In Anaheim, it seems like that would be the case if all these players develop the way they should.
Well, Jamie Drysdale, who got hurt this year, terrific player. Tristan Luneau, who was the defenseman of the year in the Quebec Major Junior League. Two really good players. Drysdale is already a good NHL defenseman, and Luneau looks like he's going to be really good as well, along with Zellweger and others.
100%. And just a quick stat here, too. Adam Fantilli actually had the best point per game of any NCAA draft eligible player pretty much since Paul Kariya. So, I mean, that's a pretty good
it's a pretty good
company
name
to
going
be in.
back to Anaheim, too. Like, that would be probably the most exciting player that they're going to have since Paul Kariya.
Okay, so Teemu Selanne, don't be disappointed. Adam Fantilli's a really good player.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, well, with that, guys, let's move on to pick number 3. Obviously, the Columbus Blue Jackets, who, again, are probably going to be pretty disappointed, but they've got a great prospect pool, and they're probably going to add to it right now. So, Craig, who are they going with?
They need a top center, and Leo Carlson delivers in that regard. And you got Laine, you got Gaudreau. So what do you need? You need a centerman that can take on those top line minutes, and I think Leo Carlson is exactly that. He's big, he's strong, and he plays a game like Nicholas Backstrom does in Washington. So when you've got a great goal scorer in Patrick Laine, you got a creative player on your left in Johnny Gaudreau. They don't have any number 1 centers. They don't have any top line center in their prospect pool. Leo Carlson adds to that pool right now. I don't think he's ready to play this coming season, but in a year's time, he can step in and I think have a big influence on the Columbus Blue Jackets.
I can't even stress to you, playing in the SHL, how difficult that is for junior hockey players. And he did it with ease. And not only did he do it with ease, Craig, it seemed like he overpowered like adults in that league. And that's not an easy thing to do. Like, I played in Sweden for 1 year, played in Hockey Allsvenskan. We played some games against SHL teams. Like, that is a tough league where it seems like there's so much puck pursuit on guys all the time. You never really have any free play. plays in that league. Like, that is how you develop. And we saw it with a guy like Moritz Seider. He was the defenseman of the year in the SHL. And he turned into an NHL player right away. And Leo Carlson, it might take a little more time, but he will be very well prepared when he makes the jump because of the time he spent in the SHL.
One of the things that happened with Leo this year, he really developed in a big way physically. So he had to adjust to that growth spurt, that physical maturity. And I thought over the course of the year, he really did a nice job of that. Just getting comfortable with his size, asserting himself a little bit more, being comfortable in that regard. Big centermen like Leo Carlson don't come along very often.
Well, okay, guys, there's one thing that's been popular in the chat throughout, because I think this is probably the biggest wild card in the draft, and I think this is probably the proper time to address it, because I got to ask you, Craig, one of the most popular names here, one of the most popular names I'm seeing out there on any fan forum, anything like that, Matvei Michkov, and why not him at 3? Why kind of do you think maybe teams aren't going that direction?
Well, I mean, you're factoring in a couple of things. Number one, his contract is through 2026, so he can't come over until he's 21 years of age. That's number one. Number two, you got to look at what teams have and what teams, so the Columbus Blue Jackets have no center iceman of the ilk of Leo Carlson. They have players like Matvei Michkov, and Johnny Gaudreau comes to mind. Now he's a little bit older, right? Michkov's a terrific player, and I don't think he's a wild card. I think teams can talk themselves out of any player they want, whether it be based on size, passport, nationality, whatever you want. Michkov's a terrific player, but I'm looking at the teams and I'm looking and going, what would be a nice fit for what they need? And understanding, I mean, Chicago's not taking Michkov at 1. And then you look at Fantilli, a big, strong. When you watch the NHL playoffs, listen, Michkov's a really good player, but you're not going to build your team with a whole lot of small, skilled players because you're not going to win when it counts.
Hey, that's good enough reason. I'm sure we're going to see his name soon enough. We'll see if it's right now, because we're going to go next to the San Jose Sharks at number 4.
I'm going Will Smith all the way from the USA National Team Development Program. He reminds me of Mika Zibanejad. At the same age, he reminds me of Mika Zibanejad. If he can turn out like Mika Zibanejad, big, strong center. Now remember, they drafted William Eklund, smaller winger, smaller, skilled player. Again, I'm going to go back to, well, how do you build your team? You're not just building your team with really good, and Michkov's, to me, a really top-notch player. But Will Smith is too. And, you look at what Mika Zibanejad does in the league right now, it's significant, it's powerful, it's impactful. And I think that's what the San Jose Sharks have got to be looking at. They have some smaller forwards.
Can I just say it? At some point, his goal song when he plays for San Jose has to be getting jiggy with it. Don't you think? Will Smith.
Well, I mean, bottom line is you get to pick your goal song. So if he doesn't pick
some teams, you can pick your goal song. But I wonder too with him, how long does he stay at Boston College? I know he's committed there, but it's one of those things where you see the flashes, you see the offense, you see the goal scoring ability. It's very tempting for a guy like that to see a team like San Jose and be, I'm playing there, and I know I'm going to play there and make an impact soon.
Don't go, no way. Bottom line for me, too many players want to rush it. The only thing I tell young players, be ready before you go to the NHL.
I agree, by the way.
Because you know this, if you're not ready, the league will chew you up and spit you out like nothing.
And we've seen it many times. It's very unforgiving. Jesperi Kotkaniemi is a great example of a guy who got thrust in right away, and it took him a while to find his footing. And so now we're getting to this range in the draft where it's okay, do they stay? Do they not stay? If you have time and opportunity, Boston College is a great place to play. Use that, and then when you step in, you're absolutely ready to play, and there's no turning back.
Cale Makar was the 4th overall pick. Quinn Hughes was the 7th overall pick. After they were, they got to go to the NHL. No, they went back to school. And Cale won the Hobey Baker. Quinn was the runner-up. And they stepped right into the NHL ready to make an impact. That hasn't changed. Alex Turcotte was the 5th overall pick. He left school after 1 year. He's still trying to find his way. Cole Caulfield stayed for 2, won the Hobey Baker. You need to stay and be ready. It's not about looking at a team and going, I have an opportunity there. Because the opportunity might be there, but you might not be ready, which doesn't matter.
So another 4th overall pick was Mitch Marner, and I was a part of his 2nd NHL training camp. And he had just gone back to junior, spent 1 more year at junior, and he looked really good in training camp. And I'm on the back end, and our D coach, DJ Smith, comes back to us. He goes, guys, see if you can get the puck to Marner. I think he's going to get 60 points this year. He got way more than 60 points. He was ready to play, but he needed 1 more year of junior, similar to how you're talking about some of these players will need a little more time at the collegiate level.
Okay, well, hopefully he doesn't. You've activated the jokes in the chat. Hopefully he doesn't go up and slap anybody when he gets drafted. So
maybe he will. Maybe he will.
You know, just in honor of the probably more famous Will Smith.
Well, we could talk about that little act, but Mike Greer's a competitor. He wants somebody that will push back.
There we go. That's the analysis we're looking for there. Okay, well, I think the analysis that a lot of people are looking for in the chat here is the Montreal Canadiens, and they're up with the 5th overall pick. Obviously, we got a lot of Habs fans here, and I mean, there's a lot of Habs fans everywhere, but give them what they want, Craig. Who are they taking?
Give them what they want. Okay, what do they want?
They wanted Connor Bedard.
I mean, they wanted Connor Bedard.
Well,
you can't give them that.
Okay, I can't give them that, but tell me what they want.
I'm going to be honest, from what I'm seeing, I don't want to keep bringing up the name, but they want Michkov.
Okay,
it's a common theme.
And there's been a lot of great diminutive players that have played in Montreal, right? And, you know, and Cole Caulfield's there right now. Yeah. And certainly Michkov would be a really good fit. I think it's very interesting. Victor Bobrov is their director of player personnel, a Russian, so you would think that he would have every bit of intel possible on Matvei Michkov.
Yeah.
And does it make sense? Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I'm a believer, swing for the fences. But I'm going with Dalibor Dvorsky.
I mean,
I'm looking for a centerman to play behind Nick Suzuki.
Yeah, and I mean, that's kind of a swing still. Like, he's a guy that's kind of rocketed up the boards recently. Obviously, he had a great U18 tournament. So is that kind of where that's coming from?
Yes, it is. Well, I mean, Dalibor's been a good player for a number of years. Obviously, he took his game at a very competitive tournament as the U18 just recently completed. But Joshua Waugh, I think, is an outstanding prospect for the Montreal Canadiens. Then I talked about Caulfield. Like, you know, keep in mind, how many players, I mean, you're building out a team, and it's not about, you know, you have Caulfield, and they got him at 15. You know, you end up getting Joshua Waugh in the 5th round. There's only so many spaces for small skilled players. And I don't care what anybody tells me. This is about winning. You're building your team to win. This isn't about who's sexy, who dangles, who shows up on the highlight reels. It's about winning. And that's what the draft is about, drafting players that can help you win. And when you have players like Matvei Michkov, sorry, I'm taking other players.
And that's the thing, like, you always look for the best player available, but if it's a tie, like, you can draft for some need, and they're going to need some size up front. You just talked about it, Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield. And when you look at that roster, you want to have playoff success at some point in the near future, and you need to have that kind of balance. So it's important for a guy like Dvorsky to be that player. Not to mention, Juraj Slafkovsky, he still needs to make another jump. Like, he has a lot of room to grow as a player, and that's a guy at 6'4", 230 pounds. And by the way, that's too heavy to play in the NHL. Like, he needs to find a way to drop a few, like, so he can get around the ice a little bit more and have a little longevity. But it's really important for them to have that kind of balance. And I just talked about it. I played 1 year in Sweden. I actually played in that league against AIK, Hockey Allsvenskan, okay? It's a difficult league to play in. There's not a lot of structure in that league specifically, so you have to problem solve your way around the ice. So maybe if you watched him play with that league, it may be left a little more to be desired, but make no mistake about it. You watch him play against his peers at the under-18 tournament, and there's a lot to like. And I was talking to one amateur scout earlier in the week about this guy, and he said he's completely sold on this player. He said he's the real deal, loves his game, loves his mentality even more. And I think that's really important when teams are drafting players this high in the draft, is to know what you're getting as a person as well as a player.
Well, 2 years in the World Junior he played as well.
And I think you guys have done a great job convincing me. I don't think you've totally convinced the chat. They still very much want Michkov.
Yeah, I get it.
It's maybe in 2-3 years, you know, they'll hear you out a little bit more. You know, they'll see the type of player this guy is. He hasn't had quite the same coverage as them. But I think it's time to probably recap our top 5 here. This is who you're going with in the top 5. Obviously, Connor Bedard there, right, number 1, not a surprise. Adam Fantilli, not really a surprise. Leo Carlson, Will Smith, Dalibor Dvorsky, I think those are maybe a little bit more surprising, but still guys that have been in the top for pretty much the whole year. So, I mean, you got to be happy with that as a fan. And I think let's find out if they're going to be happy at number 6, Craig.
There's lots of times when fans are disappointed on draft day because they didn't get the player they wanted. And then the time passes, oh, we're pretty happy with that player.
Yeah.
So at 6, I think the timeline absolutely lines up for the Arizona Coyotes and Matvei Michkov.
Wow, here we go, guys.
They have the timeline, to wait for Matvei Michkov. And I think that that's something that comes into play as well. And when you look at Michkov and you think about what the Arizona Coyotes are trying to do, they got Logan Cooley. They drafted Connor Geeky and two really good players. They're going to have the 12th pick. And you start to look at some different options there. But when you consider where the Arizona Coyotes find themselves right now and what their time frame is, it almost works perfectly. There's one other valuable thing about Matvei Michkov coming in at 21. He's on an entry-level contract, probably ready to produce at a pretty high level. That is value big time.
And if they're going to be going after Austin Matthews, they're going to need some money.
Okay.
Where's this coming from? But
I'm just a scared Leafs fan, just living out my nightmares.
It is true though about the timeline, right? Because they don't have a new arena. Like they have plans, but there's no shovels in the ground yet. So it makes sense that at some point you get this player, you have your core that's up and coming, and you're moving into a new building together, all that kind of stuff. But for the Arizona Coyotes, it seems like at some point they need someone to hit here. Like they need someone to hit and become a big-time player and help bring them from the bottom of the pile. And I look at like Kirill Kaprizov, right? He was drafted. He stayed a long time in the KHL. Eventually, he came over. He made a big-time impact on the Minnesota Wild. This is the kind of impact that Michkov can have. Like the year he had in the KHL, we talked about Sweden. The KHL is a very difficult league for young players to produce points. You can play, you can be out there, but to produce is very difficult in that league for a young player, and he did that on a team in Sochi that is, let's say, offensively challenged at the best of times, Craig.
Well, they're offensively challenged because they have all the old players that can't play in the good league anymore, so they have to go take their vacation on the Black Sea.
Well,
that's where the players go.
But that's the reality of that league. It's like St. Petersburg and the Moscow teams have all the money, and they get all the good players, and Sochi is actually a feeder team for St. Petersburg. So he's property of St. Petersburg, plays in Sochi to just get him some KHL reps, and what does he do with it? He's unbelievable. So, like, there's a real special talent there.
Logan Cooley, who there was the 3rd overall pick last year, is a heck of a player. And, we're talking about somebody that's ready to go in there. And, I don't know if he's going to go this year or next year, but he's a big-time player. So you start to build. You got Logan Cooley. I talked about Connor Geeky. You got Dylan Guenther, who's lighting it up again for the Seattle Thunderbirds in the Western Hockey League playoffs. We know how they got a lot of talent coming. Michkov just adds to that.
Well, and to back up that talent, I got some stats here. He did have the best U18 season ever in the KHL for points per game. So that's pretty impressive stuff. I think Arizona Coyotes fans, if we've got any here, are going to be pretty happy with that. But I think next up, we're going to go to a team that I think they were pretty down on their luck heading into the draft. Or again, I was reading some of these forums, and Flyers fans don't really expect much good coming to them. So maybe you can change that perspective a bit,
Craig.
Well,
I know this player, John Tortorella, is going to absolutely love, and that's Ryan Leonard of the U.S. national team. And coincidentally, he has a lot of similarities to Travis Konechny. Hard driving, fast, hungry, can score. And he was part of that great line with Will Smith and Gabe Parros, the best line outside the NHL that I saw this year. And Ryan Leonard is somebody that's not just a hard driving player. He can score, and he'll do everything in the game to help you win. And I think for the Philadelphia Flyers fans are going to love Ryan Leonard if that's who they select, because we know how much they love rugged, hard hockey. Ryan Leonard delivers heavy, hard hockey.
You talk about how much the Flyers are going to love this player. I was very lucky. I played for Torts my rookie year in the NHL. He loves his players. He really does. He wants to do right by them. Sometimes it can be misunderstood, but make no mistake, like, if you're a young player and you play for Torts, you will learn a lot. He will do everything he can to possibly turn you into an NHL player, and Ryan Leonard is going to be no different.
Great. And then I think we're moving on pretty quickly to the Washington Capitals at 8th overall.
An Austrian, David Reinbacher, the right shot defenseman. Quitted himself very well at the World Junior, played so well in the Swiss League this year. He reminds me of Adam Larsson. I don't think he's got that big offensive upside. Adam Larsson's a hard player to play against and been a really good NHL player for a lot of years. And you want Adam Larsson on your team when the going gets tough. And I think he's that style of player, and certainly somebody that's really shown by playing in the Swiss League that he's a really competent player, and I think that the Washington Capitals can use a player exactly like that.
He's a smooth player. Like everything he does, there's a certain level of fluidity to it, which is obviously very advantageous as a defenseman. And playing in that league in Switzerland, similar to how we talked about Leo Carlson playing against adults in the SHL, like very similar, except maybe even a little bit more because he's a defenseman. It takes longer for defense to develop and to be able to play against adults, and the margin for error becomes less and less. He handled that. And Washington's one of those teams, Craig, they could go either way. They could pick a really good forward. They could pick a really good defenseman. They truly are the definition of best player available at that time because, yeah, they have some aging forwards and they have some aging defensemen, and they need an injection of youth and skill.
I mean, it's not surprising you're saying that. They love skillful players. We're seeing a lot of Benson. We're seeing a lot of Oliver Moore in the chat. You know, people, they want their forwards. They want somebody to go feed Ovi the puck, you know. But it's easier to hit 900, 1,000 goals.
Yeah.
But I think that's a pretty good pick for them, and obviously something they could use. But
imagine if Michkov was available. Because I tell you, guaranteed Washington Capital if he gets to 8. Guaranteed Washington Capital if he gets to 8.
Hey, I mean, there's always somebody that drops every year, so it wouldn't surprise me.
How exciting would that be?
I would love it personally, again, and especially on the drive to beating Gretzky. I think that could be such a big storyline, and to have him kind of help that out, I think would be great for the NHL in general.
Well, we talked about mentorship for Connor Bedard and who that would be in Chicago. That would be basically the perfect mentor for a guy like Michkov if he went to Washington, to have Alex Ovechkin right there, riding shotgun with him.
Oh, for sure.
Well, as a right-handed shot, you know, Bedard's right-handed. I was kind of hoping maybe he could have some mentorship from one of the other great right-handed players, Ovechkin. But, you know, all these lefties are always dominating the league, so it's bothering me. But
do you shoot right?
Yeah, I do. Yeah,
you could tell, could you? You shoot right.
You shoot right, too.
I do.
You a lefty?
Yeah.
We know what's going on.
We like right-handed defensemen over here,
I like
Craig.
right-handed defensemen, too.
100%. And with that, I don't know, are the Detroit Red Wings taking a right-handed defenseman?
I don't think so. I have them taking Colby Barlow of the Owen Sound, a hard, rugged, like I'm talking hard and rugged. And I watched Matthew Boldy at the USA program just grow and blossom. And I've watched him do exactly the same thing with the Minnesota Wild, and I think that's what Colby Barlow is. They have, you know, they drafted Marco Kasper last year. That we know they have Dylan Larkin. I love Oliver Moore. I think Oliver Moore is a Dylan Larkin type, but those big, strong wingers that can score. The only thing I will say about Colby Barlow, I can say many things about Colby Barlow, but I'm going to finish with that. Whatever he has in his tank, you're getting 100% of it, 100% of the time. He's unbelievable in terms of being wired in competitively. And I think that when you look at the Detroit Red Wings, where they're at, how they're moving forward, I think this is a terrific fit for them.
You might even be understating his goal-scoring ability. Like, you talk about the motor and the pace he plays with and the jam. You know, that's a big buzzword a lot of people use with Colby Barlow. Like, he plays with a lot of jam. He's in the middle of everything. But he can score goals, and he puts himself in position to score goals. It would be interesting to see him play with the Detroit Red Wings because there's a lot of players on that roster who can play with the same kind of pace that he does. Most notably, Dylan Larkin would be one of those guys. It's interesting, though, you don't go with a centerman because for the longest time, it's like, is Dylan Larkin really your number one center? He's like a 1B or a 2, and they need someone to take that position and be like that elite, true elite number one center.
I don't see anybody there at that pick, though. If there was somebody there, I might go with that. But, you know, Colby Barlow, every year, I have what I call my hockey player crush. Colby Barlow's this year's hockey player.
Was I your hockey player crush in 2011?
I'll have to look back at my notes and just kind of refresh
just say
my
no.
memory. No, I don't know. I don't want to say no because it very well could be.
I was drafted 150th.
Yeah,
I was no one's crush.
It doesn't mean that you could be.
I was what you settled for.
You were a sleeper crush, you know, the deep sleeper.
You go up to Sudbury and you see him ride the stick after he scores a goal and the wolf coming down there. I mean, that's enough.
Crossing his name off my list.
No, I never did. I love celebrations.
Hey, I mean, who doesn't? And I mean, the Blues, are they going to be celebrating after this pick? Who are they going with?
They drafted Tage Thompson as a first-round draft pick from the University of Connecticut. They're going back to UConn. They're going to draft Matthew Wood. Big, strong right winger, and he has a lot of similarities to Tage Thompson. You know, can score, he's big. You know, he might not be as much of a carry the puck kind of player, but he gets in and around that net, and he knows how to score in and around the net. The patience, the poise, the length, the reach, everything that goes with it. You think about a 17-year-old going and playing NCAA hockey. First of all, you got to advance academically to be able to hold your own as a student athlete. Then you go and do what he did, almost a point-a-game player as a first-year player. Very, very impressive. And Matthew Wood, I think Matthew Wood has just so much upside once his body comes together and everything comes together for him, much like Tage Thompson showed once he got everything together.
When you watch the St. Louis Blues play, they're a team that lives and dies off the rush. And it's Kyrou and it's Robert Thomas, and it's great when you can produce off the rush. But when that offense goes dry, you need players who can play in the offensive zone and wear teams down. And that's where he would come into play. He's one of those guys where it doesn't have to be off the rush. And that's what St. Louis should be looking for. They have plenty of players who can play that run and gun style game. They need players who can establish their presence in the offensive zone. And that would be a nice mix for what they already have.
Yeah, and I think they have some players. Jake Neighbors, Zachary Bolduc, Matthew Wood comes into that thing. We know Braden Shen will play that way, Kyrou and Thomas. So, I think the St. Louis Blues will be back in the playoffs next year.
They should be. Like, they really should be. And they should have been in the playoffs this year. But, Matthew Wood is a name that's going to, now we're getting in the spot where the draft, where we kind of know it's going to take these players a couple more years, and it's going to be up to them to develop. But from the NHL team's point of view, it's like, now you need to put yourself in a position as the team where when these players are coming of age and they're ready, you're ready to compete and put them in a really good spot to succeed as young players.
I mean, hey, Matthew Wood, one of only 4 draft-eligible players to play in the NCAA this year, almost a point per game. Pretty impressive stuff. But this is our pick 6 to 10 here. It's rounded out pretty well. One thing I did notice, Craig, only 2 CHL players in the top 10. That's abnormally low. So I don't know. Do you think that's just the development of the other leagues around the world?
Yeah, for me, I think there's things that are cyclical. I mean, the U.S. program has a lot of good players, and I think when you look at the draft and you look at players, you just take what's there. Yeah. You don't try to force it, and it's not just the CHL that's producing top-level players. There's lots of good players, but where you see, so we go through the top 10, but every year this happens, and by the time you go through 11, and we finish with 16 here on this night, but when you get through the draft, by the time you get to 32, you usually see like 15 CHL players that are part of it, because there's just more quantity of player, and maybe not in the top 10, but certainly I don't think there's anything to be alarmed about.
To your point about the U.S. program developing a lot of highly skilled players, I remember like when I was getting drafted, the U.S. program was known for like really gritty, rugged, hardworking players. Like if you ever played against a U.S. team, it was just forecheck, 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 and like it was a hardworking lunch pail kind of attitude. They still have that, but they have been developing some high-end elite skill now, and that's what's really brought them to, I don't know if you want to say ahead of the CHL or on par with the CHL, but it really is like, it's not just a lunch pail attitude anymore. There is elite skill coming out of the U.S. program.
100%, and I think the Vancouver Canucks are probably hoping for some elite skill at pick number 11. And obviously, personally, I was maybe the most disappointed for them. Hometown kid, I was kind of maybe hoping he'd go to the Canucks, but who are they going with?
It would have been deserving. Wouldn't it have been nice for the Canucks to get Connor Bedard and Connor Bedard to get the Vancouver Canucks?
I always talked about the Canucks whenever I spoke to him. I was like, this would be so nice for him, It's like, just must have loved the team as a kid.
Tell him to take it easy on the Canucks now.
Yeah, exactly.
Did he do your stick handling slide?
Yeah. So we had a super deker out of the CHL top prospects, and he did okay. Yeah. But he said it was his first time. It's something you kind of got to get used to. It's, Craig was there for a bunch of it, and we know Callum Ritchie was our winner of the day. But as you said, like it's a more of an experience thing, really, because like he said, he had one at home. Conor Bedard, first time doing it. Maybe if they even that out, it goes a little different. You
would have laughed because the kids outside were waiting. They're waiting to go in for Corwin, right? So then all the kids are talking like, well, Bedard was going to win this. Bedard's going to win this. And then some of them were saying, because Callum Ritchie crushed it.
Yeah. Shout out to Callum
crushed
Ritchie.
It. Oh, yeah.
Knew what he was doing.
Oh, he sure did. Yeah. So 11. Yeah. It's not going to be a CHL player.
Oh, okay.
I think it's going to make you really happy.
I think I know where you're going with this, and I'm very happy about it.
Okay. Well, then tell me. You go. You reveal it.
Well, I don't want to blow it. Is it Axel Sandin Pelica?
It is Axel Sandin.
I'm so happy about it. If Vancouver is lucky enough to draft him, God bless you. You're so happy with this player.
Well, so the way I look at it, they have lots of great, terrific offensive players. Until they start drafting defensemen that can play in the top end of your defense group, they're going nowhere. I don't care how well coached they are, how great they're going nowhere. Axel Sandin Pelica reminds me of Sergei Zubov. I don't throw that out. Sergei Zubov just made the game easy. He didn't do it with a lot of flash or fanfare, but he was brilliant in his ability in every single zone of the ice. And Sergei wasn't somebody that went end to end. He didn't overwhelm you with his shot or with his size or his power, but he beat you up with his brain. And that's what Axel, Sandin, Pelica does. They need a defenseman. Until they start drafting them, they're going to still have the same problem.
I was lucky enough to watch him play a lot this year. So we did Champions Hockey League coverage here on TSN, which is the best teams around Europe. They play in a tournament similar to soccer, and at the end, one team is crowned a champion. So Skellefteå, the team he plays on, their star defenseman went down with an injury. Axel, Sandin, Pelica was dressed as the 7th defenseman. He comes into the lineup, and he's playing the most out of anyone that night. He plays in overtime, and he's just oozing confidence. And it was his first time getting his feet wet playing against the adults and being called up from the under 20 team. He handled it so well. Little trivia question for you.
Uh-oh.
Who was the last right-handed defenseman the Vancouver Canucks drafted that went on to play in an NHL game?
I think it's Frankie Corrado.
It's Frankie Corrado.
The time has come for me to pass the torch to Axel, Sandin, Pelica.
Just a little
You got to be there to make the pick then, you know?
Quick note on Axel Sandin. At the World Junior Tournament, he was 17 years old for Sweden. He led all defensemen for Sweden in time on ice per game. So coaches are going to play the players they think can help them win. I'm watching the U18. We're doing the broadcast. I turned to Brian Mudryk. I said, when he makes a mistake, let me know.
Yeah, he's so confident.
Yeah, and poised and comfortable.
I mean, watching these playoffs, I would take that, a defenseman who doesn't make mistakes.
He's pretty good.
You'll definitely take that. And obviously, there is still, people want that upside. You know, people are always looking for their home run picks. I'm seeing a lot of Benson in the chat still, but
Benson's from that area,
Tell
so I get
Jesse
it.
to stop messaging us.
he just loves Benson's hair. You know?
Okay, listen, I love Zach Benson. I love him. I love him to death, okay? They don't need Zach Benson in Vancouver. They need a defenseman.
Badly.
Yeah,
badly
like in the worst way.
You know how you say best player available? Yeah. No. Best defenseman available.
I'm with you.
I love it. Okay,
so whoever wants Benson gets him now at 12.
Oh, really?
Arizona with their second pick, courtesy of the trade with Ottawa, Chikrin. Arizona takes Zach Benson. They drafted Connor Geekie last year. They know what Zach Benson can do. Electrifying, dynamic. He's got that creativity and imagination like Patrick Kane. That's what Zach Benson has. And when you watch him play, you think that he's trapped, except he never is. You think that he's going to have to make a play before he has to? No, he doesn't. He understands how to hold on to the puck, how to create space for himself. He's so elusive. And I get that the Vancouver Canucks would love a home province player, but Zach Benson ends up in Arizona with a lot of skill down there.
Yeah, it's not a fit in Vancouver, but Zach Benson was a guy we got to see this year in our CHL coverage. You ever see his feet stop moving? Because I don't. Every time he's on the ice, he's shifty, he's dynamic, he's mobile, but his feet are always moving, and that's why he's always able to have the puck. That's why he can make plays when you think there's no longer a play to be made. So there's a little bit of like Mitch Marner in there where it's like,
yep.
Whenever you think he might not see something, he actually sees it because he can put himself in that position because he's always playing with that pace, moving his feet. He's a really exciting player to watch.
And along with the feet is the mind. It's processing and quick.
And I'll say, one of my favorite scouting things to do is I just watch the warm-ups and see who's the most creative, who's doing the craziest moves in warm-ups. Zach Benson is one of those guys that anytime I watched him in a warm-up, he was just trying any trick he could. So keep an eye out for those videos in the future because I'm sure we'll get a couple compilations.
He was showing off for you. He said, look, he asked, is Corwin here? He goes, I got to show him some new moves.
Yeah, Jesse's not here, so I'll show off for Corwin.
Yeah, he showed me the hair at least.
Yeah.
He's got a great mullet too.
Great hair, great hair.
I think we're going on to the 13th pick with the Buffalo Sabres.
Oliver Moore, Dylan Larkin type, and you think about up the middle, Tage Thompson, and then you got Dylan Cousins. We'll come back with the Dylan Larkin type and Oliver Moore. Makes things happen. That's a 1, 2, 3. I'll take it. And Peter, while they got Casey Mills, listen, that team is loaded in Buffalo. They're going to be Stanley Cup contenders here in the not too distant future. The blue line, the goaltending, I think is going to be just fine. And then you got up front, and I think Oliver Moore, and Dylan Larkin type coming in really gives them something. Again, disruptive speed, hard, really hard play. penalty-killing offensive play. And keep in mind that line in the USA National Team Development Program, I call it the 4-2-9 train, Perreault, Will Smith, and Ryan Leonard. Oliver Moore worked with different players. He didn't have the same level of skill playing along. Put skill with him, and I think you'll see his numbers go up. A real good, strong player that I think just makes the Buffalo Sabres that much harder to play against.
That much harder to play against, and very soon. Like, they're knocking on the door, especially in that Atlantic division. Like, they're going to be a problem for teams in the near future. And you talk about, Craig, all the time, players taking the next steps. There's some players on that Buffalo Sabres roster who are going to take a step, and that's what's going to propel them over the edge. Players like Quinn or Cousins, and, you talk about Devin Levi and the net. Like, their goaltending is going to be more than just fine. That team is knocking on the door of being very good for a long time.
Yep. I mean, that's pretty exciting for them. I mean, a guy who can carry a line, you'll always take that. Pick number 14. We're up with the Pittsburgh Penguins.
The Pittsburgh Penguins. They have a draft pick. They get a pick.
They're not used to this.
No, they're not. Like, they might not know their way up to the stage. They might have to, how do we get up there? What do we do? Braden Yeager of the Moose Jaw Warriors. And I like to use comparable types. Elias Lindholm. That's who I see Braden Yeager like. He's really good two-way player. He can contribute offense, but he plays the game in all the different areas. And he's not only somebody that can shoot the puck, but he makes plays, and he makes plays all over the ice. And it's defensively, it's offensively, it's competitively, it's on face-offs. And when you think about Elias Lindholm, I think he's one of those under-the-radar, really good players. And that's what I see in Braden Yeager. And the Pittsburgh Penguins can use some center ice help, because as great as Sidney Crosby is, and as great a season as Evgeny Malkin had, they need some help down the line. And, I'm not one to push players ahead too quickly, but if you're ever going to take a player that's got the brains and the skating ability, and he can play behind Crosby and Malkin, it might be this guy. And it might be sooner rather than later.
And one of the things that sticks out when you watch him play, we saw him play at the Top Prospects game this year, is like he knows what he wants to do with the puck before he gets it, and he processes things at a high level. But for Pittsburgh right now, it's all about get as much as you can get as far as youth in your system. That team needs a serious influx of skilled young players, because for the longest time, the whole Wilkes-Barre Pittsburgh model has been plug and play. Players who can plug and fill a hole on your roster and help you win games in the NHL at a moment's notice, and it's gone great for them, but they don't have a stable of young players compared to a lot of the other teams that have been stockpiling for a long time. And how could they? They've been Stanley Cup contenders. They've been pushing for the playoffs year after year, but now's the time. Now's the time for them to start stockpiling a little bit more, and eventually you get back to that situation where you're more of a plug-and-play team and you're knocking on the door. It's interesting with Pittsburgh. Some people think it's going to be a long ways away here before they turn it around. Some people think it's a quick turnaround. I can't figure it out with Pittsburgh, if it's a quick turnaround or not. I know where you're going with this. As long as you have Crosby, it's a quick turnaround. Am I right?
Well, it's not just Crosby. It's Gensel. It's Rust. It's Rickard Rakell. Listen, the bottom end of their lineup was not formed very well. And so you can go and find players that can skate and be disruptive. I think that's easier to do than find high-end skill. Braden Yeager might benefit from a little bit of mentorship from Sidney Crosby. Maybe he could just move into the house.
Yeah, why not? He's got an extra room somewhere in that house.
Yeah, well, again, I don't like to push players ahead, but there's always some players that just show that they're more capable than not. He's so smart, and you just talk about Braden he understands his game. He understands who he is. And if you're going to put him in a lineup and you're looking for a little injection of youth, and you don't have to play him ahead of, up the lineup, might not be a bad option.
I mean, also, hey, is there a safer place than on Sidney Crosby's wing?
No, I'd have him playing center. I wouldn't have him playing the wing. Because now you're facing the other team's best players.
Okay, well, let's see who the Predators' best player might be in a bunch of years. Who are they taking at 15th overall?
Gabe Parros. The 4-2-9 train has to get completed here, right? So Gabe is a terrific player. And, Jeff Kilty, who runs their scouting, and Barry Trotz, high-end thinking, high-end hockey IQ, really necessary. They have some really good young players. They found out this year, after they made some trades, Luke Evangelista is real. Cody Glass looks like he's taking some steps. Philip Tomasino taking some steps. They have some really good young players ready to step into their lineup, and I think that the way Gabe Parros plays the game, and I use this term in all its critical areas. He is a player that really, really can add. He's not just a one-dimensional player. He put up phenomenal numbers, but at the same time, he does some hard work in critical areas.
Craig, you always hear stories about players going to the GM or the coach and saying, listen, I need more of an opportunity. Like, I think I can offer a little bit more here. There was no better example of that coming to fruition than the Nashville Predators this year after all the trades they made. And all those young players that you just mentioned, they were given opportunities. They were hungry for those opportunities, and they made the most of it. And they were actually a better team after the trade deadline once they made those trades. So with the moves that they moved out some bad contracts. They moved out some aging players. Now they have some young players in there that are hungry to make a name for themselves and eventually win hockey games for a prolonged period of time. Like, that's the team that might have transformed their team the most after the trade deadline with the work that they did in a big time positive way.
Yeah, I mean, and hopefully Gabe Parros can do that. Obviously, on that line, he was the leading point getter, too, so there's some upside there as well in that pick.
Well, that line's going to go play at Boston College.
I know they're all together.
I mean, Greg Brown might be the happiest coach in all of the world, knowing that he's got these three.
Just open the door.
Well,
there you go.
He doesn't have to think about, who do I play these guys with? No, wait a second. They play together. So the confidence will build, not just for Gabe Parros, but for Will Smith and for Ryan Leonard. I mean, and I think that for the teams drafting those players, that's comforting too, knowing that they're going to continue to progress and with players that they've had massive success. Keep in mind, Gabe Parros broke Austin Matthews' single-season record, and he didn't just break it; he shattered it.
Yeah, I mean, who's going to trade up and get all three, you know? But let's get to the last pick of the mock draft here.
Where are you? Brian Burke, we need you to get all three guys.
We've got some advice.
Get the 4-2-9 train together.
First the Sandins, now this. But let's get to the last pick in the mock draft here. We've got our last Canadian team, too, the Calgary Flames. Who are they taking at 16th overall?
Nate Danielson from the Brandon Wheat Kings. A good, hard player. He's got skill. And to me, I think of Martin Necas. He might not be as good a skater as Martin Necas, but he makes plays. And he gets to the net. He can score from distance. He can score at the net. But he's a player that's going to attack in the middle of the ice. He's not waiting for things to unfold where it becomes easy. A lot of players, where's the easy ice? That looks a little bit too hard.
It's usually on the perimeter, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly where it is. But if you want to have success and you want to be an offensive factor, you got to attack inside the dots. You got to be ready to go through resistance. Nate Danielson does those things. And I think about the Calgary Flames. They have Connor Zary playing with the Calgary Wranglers, really taking steps up. You know, we know what Backlund has meant to their team. We know what Elias Lindholm is, but they're going to have to start looking to get some younger players into that center ice position. And I see him clearly as a top two center in his NHL career.
Well, and the center ice position for sure, but just in general in Calgary, they need that influx of youth entering their lineup. Like Jacob Pelletier is one of those guys who's knocking on the door, had a tremendous year in the AHL, and Walker Duehr is another player who gets a 2-year extension from Calgary for, getting rewarded for a job well done. He's a guy who plays with energy. Like, this is the thing for Calgary right now. You could go with a forward and you wouldn't be wrong. You could go with a defenseman with some skill. You also wouldn't be wrong. Like, they could go in any direction, and they need a little bit of both right now. So it'll be interesting, like, who's the new coach going to be? Who's the GM going to be long term? What's the vision for this team? Are they a team that thinks they can be in the mix right away next year? Are they going to be one of those teams that it takes a little bit of a longer time? There's a lot of question marks up in the air for Calgary, but there's no question that they need some skill up front, and they're going to need some skill on the back end.
I think that team's ready to push ahead next year. They made the moves they felt they needed to make, and I think that team is more than capable of returning to the playoffs along with the St. Louis Blues.
What happens in net in Calgary?
Well, Markstrom's a top-notch goalie. He had a bad year. So to me,
Dustin Wolf he's been the goaltender of the year in the league he's played in for the last 4 years.
I get where I love Dustin. Jacob Markstrom was a runner-up for the Vezina Trophy this year. I am not giving up on Jacob.
I believe in Markstrom.
He's my guy. I think the key is, how many reps does Dustin Wolf get next year? He's not ready to take on the role of number one, in my view.
Well, guys, as you can see, there were no goalies taken in the 16 to 11 pick there for Craig Button's mock draft, but a lot of impact players there, a lot of fun.
Do people think we should have taken a goalie somewhere? Come
No,
on,
I don't think anybody's asking for goalies.
goal.
Everybody's just asking for skilled players
they don't want
constantly.
goalies, right?
No.
And then all the fan bases will be complaining, I wish we drafted a goalie. How come we don't have a goalie?
Wait for the third round to draft a
Who was
goalie.
the best player taken in the 2012 draft? I just gave you the answer.
I mean,
Andrei Vasilevsky at 19.
there we go.
Best player. So you want to wait to take the best player to 19? Okay.
I mean, that was a tough draft, too. So, I don't know.
No, I'm not arguing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
all I'm telling you is the best player from that draft was Andrei Vasilevsky.
Maybe this isn't the draft to do that, though.
Well, I heard the same thing. I heard the same thing in 2012.
Fair
8
enough.
defensemen wanting the top 10 pick because everybody needed a defenseman. Go back and look. I mean, Morgan Riley's turned out really well. Hampus Lindholm's turned out really well. Jacob Trouba's turned out really well. The best player is Andrei Vasilevsky.
And I know we just made a big deal about these picks, and we always put them under a microscope, but you talked about Andrei Vasilevsky and where he got drafted. The 2011 draft, you know where Nikita Kucherov was drafted?
Yeah, late in the second round.
Late in the second round.
And do you know why?
I think I know the answer.
Okay.
I think there was a little bit of hesitation to draft him because of his KHL status and being a Russian player.
If this was a passport, it had to do with the passport. He was the best player at the U18. He dominated. He was the best player all the way through. I said this about, you can make a case, you can build any case to not draft a player. And that's what happens with too many. I see it all the time. So go ahead. That's why Kucherov ended up. It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's because of the passport.
There you go.
Well, okay, we're seeing a couple comments in the chat there. People asking what pick their team was getting. Here is the entire recap from Craig Button's mock draft. Thank you so much for joining us. There's a bunch of great players there. Obviously, Connor Bedard, #1 to the Chicago Blackhawks. That's the big news there. Tough break for the Anaheim Ducks, who had
My
the best
guy,
odds coming
Adam
in.
Fantilli, though. My guy. Craig's guy is Jacob Markstrom. My guy is Adam Fantilli.
You know who my guy is?
Who?
Axel Sandin Pelica.
Oh!
I love him. And Colby Barlow, my hockey player crush. We know you love Benson's hair.
I guess he's my hockey player crush. I mean, I'll take that. Thanks so much for joining us, guys, on YouTube, tsn.ca. Come check out some more draft coverage throughout the year.